reports over the weekend that the SABC is running out of money. And of course, it suggests that it could follow in the steps of the post office, which was placed in business rescue just today. Unions have reportedly tried to set up a meeting with the board to discuss the organization's future. We're joined now by William Bird of Media Monitoring Africa. William, good evening to you. Thank you for your time. There was a point in the past year when one looked at the SABC's financials and thought there were signs of progress. Yes, there was still a shortfall in revenue, but it seemed they were able to cover some of their expenses by and large. To hear that the SABC now is in need of R1 billion, what do you understand to have contributed to this?
Hi, good evening. Well, I think there are a number of key factors. The one is the SABC was expected to operate without any board for 6 months over the last financial year, which is just not sustainable for an entity like that. The second key thing was that with the government decided to switch off analog signal in 5 of the provinces, and that reduced the SABC's audience by 40%, which again is just not sustainable. So if you take just those 2 factors alone and add to that the fact that the economy has been ailing and that all broadcasters have really been struggling with ad revenue, it's a perfect recipe for disaster. Combined with the absence of any policy movement for over 20 years, we're still relying on the same thing for TV license fees. And of course, almost any broadcaster in that scenario would be struggling for cash. But most of the blame, I must point out, in fact, almost exclusively, should be laid firmly at the door of government. Had they acted faster and appointed a board, had they not acted with such irresponsible manner and cut off the signal so that they'd lose such a massive portion of their audience, SABC could well be in a very different position.
When we take a look at the previous board and some of the issues they highlighted, William, competitiveness has always been a big issue, and that really is around revenue generation. How do you ensure that the SABC is getting the maximum buck for the amount of money it's putting into production of content, keeping the TV on, keeping the radio on? Do you think that we've seen a significant enough turnaround there? Because it seems that the process moves and then it stops somewhere along the way. You have a much better understanding of what the snags may be.
So, fundamentally, we've got the public broadcaster expecting to operate in a model that was designed for it in the late 1990s. We're now in 2023. In 1996, 97, 98, 99, there was no Netflix. There wasn't any Amazon kind of for competition, and the SABC still had resources to do that. Your other broadcasters were still relatively flush, and it's expected to operate in that same scenario where now it simply isn't. You need a public broadcaster that's fit for purpose and that can operate in a digital environment. And it hasn't been able to transform anywhere nearly fast enough to meet those kinds of shifts and those needs. We can't expect the SABC to be producing the same kind of caliber dramas and things that you're getting on those international platforms because they're paying in dollars and they've got almost limitless budgets. But you have to have a public broadcaster because they need to be producing quality children's programming. They need to be producing quality educational programming and programming for marginalized groups and news and current affairs that is independent and that offers a different perspective to all of the other broadcasters. Increasingly in an environment where the truth and facts are so contested, you really do need credible public broadcasters together with other credible media houses in order to ensure that any member of the public can get news and information that's reliable.
We're talking about potential business rescue here and, of course, this R1 billion that is needed. What do you think the solution, at least the immediate solution, should be to try and save the SABC?
So, previously the SABC was given a R3.2 billion loan guarantee, and that's different from a bailout. What they need, government has caused this mess. They need to sort it out and they need to solve it. I don't think business rescue is at all a good idea. Brings into question all sorts of issues around governance and adds further challenges that I don't think they need. They need to get an urgent cash injection from from government, and then they need to be looking at urgent policy interventions that can start to address some of the funding mechanisms. You know, the SABC at least 5 or 6 years ago was saying that they shouldn't be being forced to pay the exorbitant costs that that they're currently expected to pay for Centec. If they could remove that from their bill, then it would solve a lot of problems, and that goes for community broadcasters too. So there are certain things where if government were to subsidize those and cover those costs anyway, that would help a great deal. And of course, all of these things must be accompanied by, you know, a continuation of good governance and trying to implement issues that support its public mandate.
William, there's of course a big issue, and it really forms part of the debate here around competitiveness and, you know, content for the public good. Do you think that we're at a point now where there are going to be expectations on the public broadcaster around which way it goes? And we know that this, of course, also has a huge bearing on the amount of content that otherwise would not be on air if it were not for the public broadcaster.
You know, the reality is that if you want to have a democracy, you have to have a functioning public broadcaster. It comes down to that. We're seeing that from countries all around the world. In New Zealand, they gave up the idea of having their own public broadcaster. They sold it off and privatized it, and it was a complete disaster. They spent the last 10 years trying to claw back some idea of what it is to have a public broadcaster. And certainly COVID highlights it to us again why you need a public broadcaster. So if we accept that we need one, the simple reality then becomes, how do we fund it, how do we sustain it, and how do we ensure that you continue and in fact encourage others to also help meet that public service mandate. At the moment, SABC is the biggest broadcaster. They reach 85% of the population on radio. Because they're speaking in African languages and communicating in African languages, how do we ensure that we retain that we continue with African language programming and ensure that there's video, audio, and visual content that meets those needs as well? And at the moment, I'm not sure that government has a plan. They shelved the white policy process that they'd started. So one of the things that needs to happen urgently is for that to be reignited and for them to move with haste, because if they don't, we're never going to get the kind of public broadcaster we all need.
William Bird, we'll leave it there for now. William Bird is the Director of Media Monitoring Africa.